Hello and welcome to DisruptEDtv, and our guest today is Peter Shulman, who is the Deputy Commissioner, New Jersey Department of Education. Peter, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Peter.
Being here.
That's great. It's a terrific guest, and this is going to be a great conversation centered around something I want to start with. We were talking a bit before the program about the scale of teaching that you have to deal with, the things that keep you up at night at the Department of Education. Normally on our program we have teachers. The teacher's environment is the classroom and the student, and so it's more intimate, and it's... Now, how many teachers do you have to deal with?
So I wouldn't say I deal with, but there's about 200,000 educators in the state, 115, 120,000 classroom teachers, but they all serve the needs of students. I think that's where the common denominator. In terms of the difference is, as a state, we are, constitutionally responsible for the thorough and efficient education of all of our students, which means 1.4 million students. What that does in New Jersey is that manifests itself through close to 600 school districts and about 2,500 schools and 150,000 or so classrooms, as we mentioned.
You have to worry about.
So as we think about this, the common denominator for all conversations, whether it be with classroom teachers or parents or policymakers, is students. Students are at the heart of everything we do.
They're the most important thing. Now, again, before the program, we were talking about how you do that. When you've got that kind of a size of sample to deal with, the only way you can really do that is by understanding the numbers, the data.
Absolutely. So I think that especially in a state like New Jersey, which is fragmented, segregated, has a lot of small municipalities and small districts, they don't have the enterprise view in terms of saying, what are all our students looking at? So when we think about the data we have in terms of student assessment, student absenteeism, student staffs, and what have you, we're able to aggregate this at the state level, then disaggregate it and looking and saying, how are our Latino students doing? How are economically disadvantaged students doing? Where are we seeing success? How do we scale that success? Right. So the data is a great leading indicator to begin those conversations, and the state is uniquely positioned to look at that data, which more often than not is really helps inform those conversations, which informs better policy making.
Sure, that makes sense.
I think it's interesting how complex this whole thing can be, and how large a scale everything is. I don't think people realize how big
They
this
don't
is.
realize that. And that's a really good point. And another point, another point. It's not just scale in terms of size, it's scale in terms of complexity within.
Right.
So we talked about diversity, I think, before the program. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's the challenges are immense in this work, and I think that diversity in itself is a unique challenge to New Jersey. So by many measures, New Jersey is the most demographically diverse state in the country. That's a hallmark. That's something we should champion. When we think about the number of different, individuals, the different languages spoken, the different cultures, that is something to celebrate.
Yes.
Conversely, the way it manifests itself in education is we're the fourth most segregated. We're the fourth most segregated. So when you think about the diversity in New Jersey and what we see at a state level, when you zoom in at a district level, at a community level, you don't see that diversity. You don't see that level of integration. And in some ways, it's very as much as stark as what we see in the community of Princeton versus a Trenton or a Haddonfield versus Camden. Sure. It's pretty much well aware. It's been sort of manifested itself or even exacerbated by real estate and other gerrymandering districts. Yeah, and that all plays a huge part in schools and the challenges that we have to make sure when we think about schools, we think about the students and we think about equity. Right. Equity in terms of access, equity in terms of opportunity, and equity in terms of outcomes. Right. And that makes the work very challenging. So just to zoom back out, as we think about policy making, well, the challenges of Princeton versus the challenges of Trenton, right, are different. And how do you develop policies that address both of their needs?
Right, so everybody has an equal opportunity to get these things.
Absolutely, and that to me is certainly one of many issues that keeps me up at night and saying, how do we make sure every student, every child has that opportunity?
Yeah, it's very important, obviously, and it's a complex issue that has to be dealt with professionally and to the point, really.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So from the point of view of an individual teacher who might be a little concerned that maybe their particular needs aren't being met, because obviously at your level, you have to look at aggregate numbers like standardized testing.
Yes, absolutely.
How do you reconcile the standardized testing need to make sure that every child is treated fairly with the fact that they're all different from each other?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple things to note. One is a child is never going to be defined by a test score. Certainly one summative standardized test score. What it is, it's an artifact, it's an element, it allows us to unpack where that student is. And I think in aggregate, it gives us a sense of where we are as a state. But as we zoom in towards the individual child, we think about that teacher and what that teacher needs. So for us, there's a couple things to realize. First and foremost, and I think this gets lost in translation, what it needs to be said, teaching is the most important profession we have in New Jersey, bar
You
none.
could say that again.
Country.
Bar none.
Teaching is the most important profession we have anywhere in the country.
Anywhere in the country. So no,
Absolutely.
I don't think I'm going to have disagreement around this statement.
No, not at all.
So as we think about the challenges of the classroom, right, they are immense. So for us, we look at it as a two-way dialogue. First, as we think about the policies we make, we do tremendous amounts of due diligence. We have conversations with teachers. We bring in districts and schools to pilot the work, to better understand what are the challenges in terms of policy making, how it actually translates to instruction in the classroom. And then, as good policymakers and good stewards of policy making, we need to continually listen. So as we enact a policy and as we think about how that policy plays out, we realize things that might sound good theoretically in practice might look a little different.
Okay.
So we teach our students to be lifelong learners.
Right.
We as policymakers want to be lifelong learners. Teachers and the voice of educators are the conduit for us. So we're able to better understand and have that two-way dialogue and saying, we've enacted a policy which has turned itself into an initiative that's actually looking different in the classroom in their school building than we envisioned. We then need to tweak that policy. We need to provide some flexibility with that.
Right.
Because the whole idea of this is that how do you create policy that supports children, that supports accountability and transparency, but doesn't shackle educators.
Doesn't shackle educators.
And it's very difficult.
Yeah, that's key. That's key also from our point of view. I mean, our whole program is centered around creativity of individual instructors, individual teachers, and how they approach the learners that they serve.
Absolutely. Well, we agree. The best ideas come from teachers. They don't come from policymakers in Trenton.
That's-
right?
that's-
And I think that needs to be clearly stated as well.
So then your job, let me see if I understand it. Your job is to listen to teachers, which you do. I mean, that's key. And a little later on in the program, you'll get to tell teachers in New Jersey how to reach you.
Yes.
Because you want to hear from them.
Right.
You listen to teachers.
They're not shy. They found me.
I know, they found you before, but we're going to help them.
Yeah, okay.
So,
Great.
so stand back, your phone is going to ring.
Yes.
But you listen to teachers, you learn from them what it is they need in order to support their learner community, and then you develop policies, and then you communicate that back down to the schools. I don't want to say down. You communicate that out to the schools, and
Sure.
I want to put a fine point on that whole cycle right after this break. We need to take a break. We'll
Sure.
be right back after this break on DisruptEDtv with a terrific guest, Peter Shulman from the New Jersey Department of Education.
Be right back. Stick around.
Thanks, Peter. Welcome back to DisruptEDtv. My name is Al Cini,
My name is Joe Osmendi.
but more important than anything is our
Very
guest today, Peter Shulman from the New Jersey Department of Education, Deputy Commissioner.
Yes.
And just before the break, we were talking about, I don't want to refer to it as a cycle or a hierarchy. There is an ongoing conversation, and we're building a community. And in that community, you listen to teachers.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about that.
Absolutely. So first, it's important to think it's not just teachers. Teachers have a critical voice, and they let us know what is going on in the classroom better than anyone. But as we think about other staff members, as we think about supervisors, principals, superintendents, school board members, these voices are critically important.
Right.
But also, students, parents, elected officials. There's a lot of voices in this ecosystem, all of which are well-intended, all of which have a different angle or a different lens which they might approach the work. Part of our job is to actually disaggregate these voices, listen to them, and think about the confluence of these voices as we think about regulatory policy making.
That's important.
It is challenging, yes.
So let's get down back into that classroom.
Yes.
I think that's such a great point. I think that's very important. A common complaint that teachers voice is that they feel like they have to teach to the test.
Yep.
Talk about that.
So I think,
because-
no, I think it's certainly, so as we think about this, as we think about teaching to the test, trying to understand what that means. First and foremost is federal law, right? And the federal government provides close to $1 billion in aid to New Jersey, the primary of which goes to special needs students and economically disadvantaged students. Federal law requires that we test in certain grade levels, 3rd to 8th grade in math and ELA, and once in high school in math and ELA. So testing is a part of our life, right?
Yeah.
So as we think about this, that no one's ever going to like standardized testing. It's never going to pull well. It's not something's going to be excited about. How do we do a better job of it? So first is we want to make a test, okay, as we think about the sophistication of testing and the precision of testing, that is not the typical bubble test that you and we all took growing up. We want to have a test that's aligned to standards, that thinks about problem solving and critical thinking skills, that the best test preparation or teaching to tests is good classroom instruction. And that's what we hear from our educators. Secondarily is, how do we make a test valuable? And this is where the voice of educators is most important. They want to they want to receive data back on students and standards. They want to get that data back in a timely manner that's easily accessible and is disaggregated for them so they can understand their roster of students, both the roster of students who may have graduated to the next grade level as well as their incoming roster. We as the state need to be informed, and I think we're stepping, taking a half step in the right direction, but it's a broader conversation. How do we do a better job of that? And to me, that's the voice of the customer. That's the educators telling us in the classroom, this is what I need, this is when I need it, this is the form I need it in, and this is how I need it presented to me.
So to make those test scores real important and give them value.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
so critical. And I hate to call it scores because scores make it sound like people win and people
Right.
lose, and they're not scores in that sense.
The
Numbers that indicate progress.
Exactly.
And that indication really, I mean, speaking as people who represent industry, it's important that the people who graduate school can come into our companies and they know how to read and write and do all the things that they need to do. And you need some kind of a standardized test to make sure that schools are producing at that level.
I would agree. And I think when we think about standardized tests, we're thinking about math and ELA, which are, in my mind, essential but far from exhaustive skill sets. As you think about your peers and you think about colleagues in the professional world, and then you think about people who want gainful employment to be civically engaged, math and ELA are not the exhaustive set. As we think about all these pieces, and we think about communication skills and financial literacy and civic engagement, all of which are critically important. So as we think about this, it's important to level set the conversation because there's a false dichotomy that goes on that says it's either standardized test scores or it's the whole child.
Okay.
The answer is it's both.
It's both.
The answer is it's both.
It's
and I
both.
think that's a nuance that at times, whether it be the media or elected officials, don't seem to capture because the friction in the conversation at times drives the dialogue.
Two have to be integrated.
Let me bring down, I'm going to use a phrase based on my own experience. A test score, even though I hate that word, I hate both words actually. When I get a grade, whatever that grade is, it's a dependent variable. It's not an independent variable. That number can change if I do the work.
Oh, absolutely.
So making sure that a student has a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset.
I think that's right. So I think the idea is that, if you step back and you think about education, education has not, from the standpoint of other industries, been as informed by data. So as we think about the ability for data and computer adaptive learning and machine learning to better understand the needs and the nuances of children, to inform educators, right? This is a human-driven business. I believe it always will be and always should be, right?
Absolutely.
So as we think about it, the data should not drive what we do, but should inform what we do. So there's a huge opportunity there, and I think we're only at the tip of the iceberg in touching upon that. So summative assessment data in two subject areas, right? As important as we believe that is, it's far from exhaustive, as I said before, right? But for us, and this gets back to the educator standpoint, we want to understand what educators need. I mean, we started to talk a little bit about the role of the state, right? We look at ourselves as a support and service organization,
so important.
right?
That's such an important orientation.
Right. So we have issues of accountability and transparency. That's part of our role, right? That's we got to call balls and strikes. That's part of what we need to do.
Sure.
At the same time, we think support and service. That's got to be built into our DNA. We need to be able to have that two-way dialogue that's built upon trust and respect, and really a concerted effort to understand what the needs of educators are, and then to design the policies and design the regulations to meet those needs.
Well, that's then the real reorientation, and it's very gratifying to hear you say it. The top of the org chart really is the student. Underneath that is the teacher. Underneath that is school administration. Your job is to support that function.
Absolutely. And to be very clear, at times there's daylight between what some of these different groups want. So for us, we are going to be unequivocal, the student. That's our North Star, making sure we're giving the needs of the student and understanding the needs of the student and driving policy in that manner, right? But you have to consider all of the other players in the ecosystem, understanding their viewpoints, and creating a balance, which is difficult to do because as we think about all the different interests, everything from the idea of that, there are bus companies, there are textbook companies, there are folks that are all well-meaning and well-serving.
Sure.
Well, these companies, they have bottom lines. They have revenue that they need to project. We have teachers that are saying, you know what, I need to get paid, and I think, with the collective bargaining should look to all which are critically important, right? But how does that translate into student performance? And that's part of our goal to think about.
Sure, that's important. When we come back after the break, we'll talk more about that.
Sure.
We'll also talk about the role of disruption in creative ideas in education. And we'll be right back with more DisruptEDtv and more Peter Shulman from the New Jersey Department of Education after this break.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Welcome back to DisruptEDtv, and thanks for rejoining our conversation with our guest, Peter Shulman. My name is Al Sini.
I'm still Joe Osamendi.
It's glad you haven't changed.
Yes, thank you.
And during the break, actually before the break, we had started this conversation about disruption and the importance of coming up with creative ideas in education. That's pretty much what we're about. Even before the program, as we were talking, that's something that we are on the same page with you about. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Let me talk about it through two lenses. The first being is the best ideas will come from the classroom. We talked about that, not from Trenton. The best ideas will come from the classroom. As I mentioned before, we have 600 pretty insular districts. And sort of with the idea of home rule, you have a lot of districts out there. They have their own school district, their own fire, police, library, and this is something that's sort of built into the fabric of New Jersey. So from the standpoint of where the state has sort of an enterprise view, how do we understand what best practices are going on in schools and classrooms? How do we play that role to actually say, we're going to shine a light on this? I think you're going to hear about this Lighthouse District initiative from my commissioner at some point down the road. But as we think about that, we have the ability to understand best practices, we have the ability to recognize them, and ideally to scale them. Because we don't see this naturally going on naturally from district to district at the level we would like. Sure. The second piece of this is that education is as I mentioned before, starting to become more data informed. We typically in education, K-12, and not just in New Jersey, but when I talk to my colleagues across the country, we don't do a lot of R&D, right? Whereas most other industries are constantly driving R&D to understand their products, to inform their bottom line. For us, we're not doing a lot of R&D. And part of it is because I don't think we've had the data, the relational databases, longitudinal data to do such R&D. And then it puts us at the whim of a revolving door of whether it be governors or commissioners, where policies change every 4 or 8 years.
Sure.
This has been going on probably for the better part of 100 years. So when I think about innovation, it's not just about classroom best practices, it's using R&D to actually continuously improve. It's using data to better understand how policies are translating themselves into practice and how they can be improved upon. So as we think about innovation, we've recently put, for an example, we've put forth a state longitudinal database where we've connected everything from preschool data to K-12 data to higher ed data to now labor data to really understand how are we thinking about this trajectory and how are we understanding the needs of the labor market and back mapping from what we see the needs of a kindergartner per se. So all of this has to me very, very powerful ways to sort of disrupt the way that typical policy making is done.
Yeah, that's important. And you mentioned policy, and you're talking about data and you're talking about regulation, which obviously are within your purview, and that makes perfect sense. But a big part of changing behavior in schools is positive reinforcement, recognizing schools when they do well. So it's not just about catching people doing things wrong, it's about catching people doing things right.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'd say it's an area that, when I think back certainly in my 6 years, we need to be doing more of. I think there's a lot of times that when there's policy disagreements, that sucks out all the oxygen in the room.
Yeah.
There is so much great work being done in our schools and classrooms by our educators that we need to better identify, better recognize, better showcase, and better scale.
Yes, we see that here on DisruptEDtv all the time.
And to me, that this is part of the excitement about the work, is that, we teach our children to be lifelong learners, right? We all agree with that. We ourselves need to be lifelong learners. And from my role and from my colleagues at the state, our ability to learn comes from our classroom educators. They're the ones that are informing us. We need to do a better job of recognizing the work.
Positive reinforcement leads to continual improvement.
Absolutely,
I mean, that's
absolutely.
the culture of positive improvement that you want
exactly.
ongoing inside the school system. And your job at the Department of Education is to encourage that kind of thing. And
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'm someone who believes that as we think about, parents and teachers and students, everyone wakes up every morning saying they want to do their best. We're all rowing in the same direction,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And as we identify where someone is doing a better job or doing a unique practice, we need to really put a spotlight on that and
Yes.
think about how we can scale that. And again, I think because of the state's role and because of the delivery model of education in New Jersey, it is quite fragmented, right? And I don't think we're solving it at today's dinner table.
Right.
But in terms of that, the state is uniquely positioned to play that role. I mean, we sometimes make the joke of this thing like Match.com. We're the ability to sort of match folks up because we have that enterprise view.
Now, that's where we share a common goal. Where our job on
Absolutely.
DisruptEDtv is to take ideas like that and make sure.
Part of the reason I was so
other people hear
excited
about
to come on the show.
That's important. But before we end our programming, we're coming up on the end of a great half-hour conversation with you, Peter, and we really appreciate your appearance on the program today. I want to ask you how the Department of Education knows that it's making life better in individual communities, maybe challenged communities.
Yeah, no, I think that is, that is a great question. I personally got in this work to help sort of our disenfranchised students. Many of them are poor minorities in urban and rural areas.
Great.
And, we talked a little bit about equity and the importance of equity. Right. So certainly as we look at this, one element is data. So as we think about test scores, as we think about dropout rates, as we think about graduation rates and what have you, we want to see that pointing in the right direction. We want to look at it not just from a performance standpoint, but looking at achievement gaps, are we narrowing that? So all of those are very important, right? And then certainly now having the ability to follow our students and say, they've graduated, are they going on to college? Are they enrolled in college 16 months later? Are they actually, going to and through? All of which I think is extremely important. But secondarily is you need the voice of the community. So this is where I think, where I believe that you're going, is that I believe the school is the hub of the community. As we think about, in some ways, and I live in a typical suburb in New Jersey, in Cherry Hill. And as we think about what the community is like, and we think about the idea that it may not be what folks grew up with, right? As we think about the idea of, people that are on their devices at home, they're doing different interacting social. The school remains that hub of interaction, right? The school is so important. So we need to really understand, again, our role is about service and support. Are we meeting the needs of the community, right? And we talked about sort of test scores in math and ELA not being everything. I certainly agree. So what does the community want? Do they want an agricultural program? Do they want a computer science program? Do they want a different grade configuration? We need to understand our role in that. A lot of that is local decision making, and certainly we need to support that, and we do support that. But there are things that we need to do in our policies to provide them that flexibility.
Right.
And as sometimes we mention the idea of shackling classroom teachers, sometimes we shackle communities. And for us, it's really understanding from them. So again, I think the dialogue, and I don't mean shouting matches, I mean genuine dialogue is so important to this work because it allows us to be better policymakers to serve the communities.
That's good. Where the goal really is to produce the best student you can possibly produce and then return them to their community to make it the best community they can possibly.
Listen, we want, as we would all agree, a test score, even a high school diploma, these are not culminating events.
No.
We want our young adults to go on to be gainfully employed, civically engaged, productive citizens in their community.
Wow.
And I think that's, that's where we look at the end goal. All the other pieces are leading indicators to hopefully let us know if we're on the right track. But I think that's, again, to sort of track back to where we started this conversation. We're all rowing in the same direction. Everyone wants that for our children.
Wow. Peter Shulman, we're at the point in our program where you get to tell everybody how to hold you accountable.
Absolutely.
I mean, what you just outlined your job for us.
Yes.
So how do people, you look right into your camera and tell people how they can reach you if they have.
Sure, I was going to give my boss Kimberly Harrington's email address, but I'll give my email address. It's peter.shulman, peter.shulman @doe.state.nj.us. As I've said before, New Jersey educators, New Jersey community are not shy. I'm very accessible. I look forward to having a dialogue.
That's great, and its parents and school board members
Absolutely.
In
and
the community.
whoever has a stake in the quality of education can feel free to.
Whoever has an email address.
Yeah, I'm going to send you an email right now.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Peter.
Appreciate
Pleasure
being
having you.
here.
Thank all of you for joining us today on DisruptEDtv with our guest Peter Shulman, who did a terrific job. My name is Al Cini,
I'm still Joe Acevendi.
and we'll see you again on another episode of DisruptEDtv.
Absolutely looking forward to it.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Terrific. Thank you. Great.